The council chamber stretched out like a vast arena, circular and imposing. 14 different species sat in their designated sections, each area designed for their specific biology. Some breathed methane through masks. Others floated in liquid-filled containers. The humans sat in simple chairs, breathing ordinary air. Looking small among the giants and the strange, Ambassador Jiwon Park stood at the speaker's platform for the third time that year. Her gray hair was pulled back neatly. Her uniform was crisp and professional. She had given speeches here for 40 years, and her voice never wavered. Even when the chamber filled with clicking sounds that passed for laughter among the Valkyrie. "We come again to request protection for our trade routes," Jiwon said. Her words were translated instantly into 14 languages by the chamber's systems. 3 more ships were destroyed last month. 217 people died. They were merchants, families, civilians traveling between our colonies. The Valkyrie representative rose from its section. The creature looked like a massive mantis, easily 3 meters tall, with 4 arms and eyes that reflected light like black mirrors. Its voice came out as rapid clicks and buzzes translated flatly by the machines. "Humans complain again. Humans always complain. Space is dangerous. If humans cannot defend their ships, perhaps humans should not travel." Laughter sounds filled the chamber. Not all species joined in, but enough did. Giwon felt Captain Minho Kong tense beside her. He was her security chief, a former military officer who now spent his days standing quietly during diplomatic sessions. His hand moved slightly toward his sidearm before he caught himself. Dr. Hannah Cho, sitting in the observer seats, leaned forward. She had studied alien cultures for 20 years and still believed in the possibility of understanding. She had written 17 papers on cross-species cooperation. She wanted to believe this moment would turn around. Jiwon continued speaking, her voice steady. "We have brought evidence of the attacks." The ships were marked with civilian identifiers. They broadcast non-hostile signals. They were following all established trade protocols. This was not piracy. This was murder. The council's lead arbiter, a floating jellyfish-like being called a Matherin, spoke in musical tones. "The council has reviewed the human petition. We find insufficient evidence of coordinated attack. The vote will now commence on whether to extend protected status to human trade routes." The voting display lit up around the chamber. One by one, the species registered their decisions. Red lights appeared far more often than green. When the final tally showed, humans had received support from only 2 species. 4 voted against. 8 abstained. "The petition is denied," the Matherin announced. "This session is concluded." Guan bowed slightly, maintaining her composure. "We thank the council for their consideration." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but she said them anyway. 300 years of human diplomacy rested on the principle that patience would eventually be rewarded. As they walked back through the embassy corridors, Minho finally spoke. "They're not going to help us. They've never going to help us." "We have to keep trying," Juan replied. "War is not an option. We've built too much to throw it away now." Hannah joined them, clutching her datapad. "Some species are coming around. The Sothri abstained this time instead of voting against us. That's progress." "Progress," Minho repeated bitterly. 200 dead is progress." They reached the embassy's secure communications room, just as the first distress signal came through. Then another. Then another. Within minutes, 17 different channels were screaming for help simultaneously. Giwon's face went pale as she read the displays. The Outer Rim colonies. All of them. They're under attack. The screen showed orbital bombardment. Valkyrie warships had appeared simultaneously over every human colony in the outer systems. They weren't targeting military installations because there weren't any. Humanity had demilitarized the Outer Rim as a show of good faith 5 years ago. They were targeting cities, homes, schools, hospitals. Minho was already moving, calling for emergency protocols. "Get me a Security Council session now. Immediate emergency broadcast." Hannah stood frozen, watching the feeds. Entire cities were burning. The colony on Taiyang 3 had 12,000 people. She had visited there twice for cultural research. She knew families there. She watched the city turn to glass under sustained energy weapons. G1 tried every emergency channel to reach the council. The Matheran Arbiter finally responded after 20 minutes. 20 minutes, while millions of humans died. Ambassador Park. The council is aware of the situation. We are discussing appropriate responses. Appropriate responses? Guan's voice cracked for the first time in 40 years of service. They're killing everyone. Every colony. Millions of people. You need to send help now. The council must follow proper procedures. A vote will be held tomorrow to determine if intervention is warranted. Tomorrow? There won't be anyone left tomorrow. The council cannot act without proper authorization. You understand the rules, Ambassador. The channel went dead. Minho returned, his face hard. I've sent emergency broadcasts to Earth. Fleet Command is responding, but they're weeks away. The Outer Rim colonies have no defenses. They watch the screens in silence. One by one, the distress signals ended. Not because the attack stopped, but because there was no one left to send signals. Hannah was crying silently. We trusted them. We spent 300 years building relationships. We shared our technology, our medicine, our culture. We disarmed our colonies to show we meant peace. They took it as weakness, Minho said quietly. The last signal came from the colony on Sibyl 9, a woman's voice broken and desperate. If anyone can hear this, tell Earth what happened here. Tell them the galaxy chose this. Tell them we tried. Tell them. Static.g. One sat down heavily in her chair. 12 million people had lived in those colonies. Human families who had moved to the frontier believing the galaxy was safe, that humanity's diplomatic efforts had created a community where species could coexist. The Valkyrie had waited until those colonies were defenseless, and then they had erased them. What do we do now? Hannah asked. G. One looked at the dead screens, at the silent channels where millions of voices had been just hours ago. She thought about 40 years of speeches, of patience, swallowing insults and accepting humiliation because she believed in the process. She thought about the council's laughter. She thought about the Matheran, asking her to wait for tomorrow. We go home, Jiwan said. We tell Earth what happened. And then she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to beat him. MINHO was already composing a message to Fleet Command. Not a request for help. Not a diplomatic protest. Something else entirely. Something he had hoped he would never need to send. The code words were simple. Nightfall protocol. Authorization required as the embassy staff began emergency evacuation procedures. None of them looked back at the council chamber. They had spent lifetimes trying to be part of the galactic community. The galaxy had given its answer in fire and blood. The age of human diplomacy was over. What came next would remind the galaxy why humanity had worked so hard for peace in the first place. Deep, beneath the mountains of the Korean peninsula. Lights flickered on in corridors that had been dark for 200 years. Fleet Admiral Tai Young-song stood in the command center, his weathered hands resting on consoles that hummed to life after centuries of silence. He was 83 years old, one of the last humans alive who remembered when these facilities had been fully operational. Nightfall protocol confirmed, the automated voice announced. All systems activating. Around him, younger officers stared at the displays with growing disbelief. Tactical Officer Hyunwoo Nam, barely 30 years old, watched as star maps revealed ship positions that weren't in any public registry. Hundreds of vessels. Thousands. Fleet strength that shouldn't exist. Sir, these numbers can't be right, Hyunwoo said carefully. We have 12 active battleships in the public fleet. This shows 200 capital ships. Taeyong's expression didn't change. The numbers are correct. The Nightfall fleet has been maintained in secret for 300 years. Rotating crews trained in classified exercises. Ships built in hidden shipyards and kept in cold storage. Every generation of officers sworn to secrecy. But why? We've been at peace. No, the Admiral corrected. We've been hoping for peace. There's a difference. On the surface, General Soman Lee was activating her own protocols. Ground forces training facilities across Earth suddenly shifted their schedules. Civilian engineers received coded messages and reported to military installations. Factories that had produced medical equipment and terraforming tools began retooling their assembly lines. The Galactic Council sent 17 different communications to Earth. So over the next 3 days, all went unanswered. Human embassies across the galaxy began evacuating personnel. No explanations were given. No diplomatic protests filed. Just silence and systematic withdrawal. It made the Council nervous. They had expected the humans to complain, to demand justice, to follow the proper procedures they always followed. Instead, human space had gone completely quiet. Ships were being recalled. Communications cut off. It was like watching a door close, and some species began to realize they might not like what was on the other side of that door. Juan Park arrived at the command center 5 days after the massacre. She had expected to face blame, perhaps even criminal charges for the failure of her diplomatic mission. Instead, Tai Young greeted her with something unexpected. Respect. Ambassador, we need you. I failed, Ji-won said simply. 12 million people died because I believed in the Council. You believed in the possibility of peace? That's not failure. That's hope. Tai Young gestured to the tactical displays. But hope didn't save those colonies. Now we need something else from you. We need you to tell us how to hurt them. Jawan looked at the star maps, at the fleet positions, at the weapons manifests. You want me to help you wage war? We want you to help us wage the right war. You know the Valkyrie better than anyone. You've studied their culture, their military structure, their psychology. You know what they value? You know what they fear? She studied the displays for a long moment. Part of her wanted to refuse, to say that she was a diplomat, not a warrior. But that part of her had died watching the distress signals go silent. The Valkyrie value strength above everything, she finally said. They see mercy as weakness. They attacked our colonies because they thought we were soft. They thought we would file protests and follow procedures while they expanded their territory. Well then, we need to teach them a different lesson. General Soman joined them via video link. Behind her, engineers were assembling weapon systems from blueprints that looked ancient. The factories are converting. We'll have full production capacity within 2 weeks. Tar. What are those designs? Hyunwoo asked, zooming in on the schematics. Weapons from our last major war, Saman replied. 300 years old by technical standards, but they were designed for one purpose: maximum lethality. No restraint protocols. No safety limits. Nothing designed to minimize casualties. That's barbaric, Soman agreed simply. When humans fought each other, we learned how to hurt ourselves very efficiently. These designs were sealed away because we decided we never wanted to use them again. But they weren't designed to fight humans. Across Earth, similar scenes played out. Shipyards that had built commercial vessels began constructing warships from classified designs. Training facilities ran combat simulations that hadn't been used in centuries. Soldiers learned tactics that weren't in any public military manual. Dr. Hannah Cho walked through one such facility, watching young troops train with weapons that seemed wrong somehow. Too efficient. Too focused on killing rather than disabling. She found Minho Kong observing the same exercises. This is what we were, Minho said quietly. Before we decided to try peace, before we joined the galactic community, we were very, very good at violence. Gave this up, Hannah said. We chose to be better. We chose to try being better. The galaxy chose otherwise. She watched a simulation where human forces used swarm tactics against a simulated alien vessel. The human ships didn't try to disable. They overwhelmed, destroyed, moved on. It was ruthlessly efficient. What have we become? She whispered. What we always were, Minho replied. We just stopped pretending we weren't. Back in the command center, Taeyang was briefing his fleet commanders via secure channels. The faces on the screens were hard and professional. These were officers who had trained their entire careers for a scenario they hoped would never come. First Fleet will launch in 72 hours, Taeyang announced. Our target is not the Outer Rim. Our target is not defensive positions. We're going straight to Valkyrus Prime. The silence on the channels was profound. Valkyrus Prime was the Valkyrie homeworld, the heart of their entire civilization. Sir, one commander said carefully, that's an aggressive escalation. The Council will view it as the Council forfeited their right to opinions when they let 12 million humans die. Taiyang cut him off. We're not seeking their approval. We're not following their rules. We're teaching the Valkyrie why humanity spent 300 years avoiding this exact situation. Giwan spoke up. The Valkyrie military doctrine is based on defending territory through layered defenses. They'll expect us to try to retake the outer rim colonies first. They'll have fortified positions waiting, which is why we're not going there, Taiyang agreed. We're going to do what they don't expect. We're going to hurt them where it matters. Yunwu pulled up intelligence reports, his hands shaking slightly as he read. Ambassador Park's diplomatic files contain detailed information on every Valkyrie military installation, every supply depot, every command center. She gathered all this during diplomatic visits. 30 years of careful observation, Guan confirmed. I was trying to understand them, to find ways to build trust. Now that information will be used differently. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Humanity's peaceful diplomatic efforts had created the most comprehensive intelligence network the galaxy had ever seen. Every embassy visit, every cultural exchange, every trade negotiation had been an opportunity to observe and learn. General Salmon smiled grimly. They let us in because they thought we were harmless. They showed us everything because they didn't think we were a threat. They were very, very wrong. As the 72-hour countdown began, Earth transformed. The planet that had been the center of human diplomatic efforts became something else entirely. A war machine that had been dormant, not destroyed. Waiting, not defeated. On the launch platforms, ships that had never seen combat began their final preparations. The crews were young, born into the era of peace, but they had been trained by those who remembered war. They knew what they were about to become. Taeyong walked through the flagship's corridors, running his hand along the walls. The ship was called Soul's Vengeance, a name that had been chosen 300 years ago by people who hoped it would never be used. Do you think they understand yet? Guan asked, joining him. No, Taeyong replied. They think we're going to follow their rules, fight their way, seek their approval. They don't understand that we're done asking permission. The countdown reached 0. The first fleet launched, 200 warships appearing in space simultaneously. They didn't broadcast their intentions. They didn't issue warnings. They just started moving. Traveling at speeds that shouldn't have been possible. With public human technology, the galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest gift to the galactic community hadn't been their medicine, or their culture, or their diplomacy. It had been their restraint. The Valkyrie defense satellites detected the human fleet 6 hours before it arrived. That should have been plenty of time. Standard protocol called for defensive formations, communication with allied species, and diplomatic channels to negotiate. The Valkyrie military command tried all three. No one answered their calls. The human ships just kept coming. Admiral Taiyung stood on the bridge of Soul's Vengeance, watching the tactical display. 12 Valkyrie systems spread before him, each one marked with military installations, shipyards, and defense platforms. His orders were simple and brutal. All ships, begin bombardment on my mark. Target priority. Military installations first, then industrial capacity, then infrastructure. Avoid civilian population centers unless they fire from those locations. They're broadcasting surrender requests, the communications officer reported. Do they accept responsibility for the colony massacres? No, sir. They're claiming they were defending their territory from human expansion. Then we're not accepting their surrender, Mark. The human fleet opened fire simultaneously. 200 warships unleashing weapons that the galaxy hadn't seen in action before. The Valkyrie defense satellites simply ceased to exist. Torn apart by missile swarms that moved in patterns, no defense system was designed to counter Commander. Gina Bay led her fighter wing through the debris field. She had lost 3 friends in the Outer Rim colonies, people she had trained with, laughed with, planned futures with. Her targeting computer locked onto a Velkari cruiser, and she didn't hesitate. Blue Wing, Wolfpack formation. Target the command vessel, aft section. Make it hurt. Her fighters moved like a school of predatory fish, fast and coordinated. They didn't engage in the traditional fighter combat the Velkari expected. Instead, they focused their fire on specific ship sections, breaching hulls and venting atmosphere. The Velkari crew had time to feel their air being sucked into space. Gina wanted them to have that time. The Velkari fleet tried to respond. But human electronic warfare turned their own systems against them. Targeting computers locked onto friendly vessels. Communication channels broadcast false orders. Navigation systems reported incorrect positions. It was chaos. On the ground, special operations teams led by Yoonji Yoon were already moving through Velkari colony installations. They had infiltrated 3 worlds simultaneously using stealth insertion methods that shouldn't have been possible. The Velkar had never developed counters because they didn't know such methods existed. Yoonji's team placed charges on the main resource extraction facility of Velkaris 7. The installation processed rare metals crucial to Velkari ship production. Destroying it wouldn't kill anyone directly, but it would cripple their military for years. Charges set, her second-in-command reported. Evacuation alarms are sounding. Civilians are leaving the area. Good, we're not here to kill civilians. We're here to break their ability to wage war. The facility exploded in a carefully controlled demolition. Yoonji's team was already moving to the next target, and they broadcast their message on all Velkari frequencies. You took our families. We're taking your future. Back in orbit, the space battle was already over. It had lasted 40 minutes. The Velkari military had expected hours of combat, time to call for reinforcements, opportunities to negotiate. Instead, they faced human tactics that were designed for total destruction. Human ships didn't try to disable enemy vessels elegantly. They used overwhelming firepower to shred armor, then targeted crew sections specifically. When Velkari ships tried to retreat, human fighters pursued them, using the wreckage from destroyed vessels as kinetic weapons to damage engines. It's not honorable, one of Taeyong's officers said quietly. Watching Velkari survivors being evacuated from damaged ships? No, it's not, Taeyong agreed. But efficiency isn't meant to be honorable. It's meant to win. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Representatives from 14 species gathered in the chamber, now looking at screens showing the devastation in Velkari space. The Mothran Arbiter's musical tones had lost their calm quality. We demand Earth cease hostilities immediately. This violation of galactic law will not be tolerated. Earth's response arrived via a live transmission. Not from the diplomatic corps, not from political leaders. From Admiral Taeyong himself, standing on the bridge of his flagship with Velkaris Prime visible through the viewport behind him. His voice was calm, almost gentle. The Council had 300 years to learn that humans wanted peace. You had 300 years to understand that our patience was a choice, not a weakness. You failed to learn that lesson. The Velkari attacked our defenseless colonies and killed 12 million civilians while you debated proper procedures. The Council will not permit. The Council will be silent, Taeyong interrupted. You have no authority here. You chose neutrality when our people were dying. So we're choosing to handle this ourselves. The transmission ended. Matriarch Skrita, leader of the Velkari Triumvirate, watched her military crumble from her command center on Velkaris Prime. She had ordered the attack on human colonies, believing it would demonstrate Velkaris supremacy. The humans had always seemed weak, always compromising, always backing down. She tried to rally her remaining forces. All fleets converge on the homeworld. Activate every reserve vessel. Call on our alliance partners. Her tactical officer looked up from the displays, all 4 of his arms trembling. Matriarch, the humans have already disabled 17 of our 20 rally points. Every strategic asset we deploy, they destroy before it can be used. And our allies, they're not responding to our calls. What do you mean they're not responding? I mean they're cutting communications. The Drathon Confederation just declared neutrality. The Kresh hierarchy is recalling their ambassador from our space. Matriarch. They're afraid of becoming targets too. Skrita felt something she hadn't experienced in her long life. Genuine fear. She accessed the intelligence reports her people had gathered on humans over the centuries. Peaceful traders, skilled diplomats, advanced medicine, and generous cultural exchange. Nowhere in 300 years of observation had they detected this capability. How did we not know? She whispered. Her intelligence chief answered quietly. They didn't show us. Every embassy, every trade negotiation, every cultural exchange was them watching us while we thought we were evaluating them. They studied our military, our industry, our strategies. Ambassador Park filed thousands of reports over 40 years. We have some of them in our databases. They're labeled as cultural observations and diplomatic analysis. Skrita accessed one of the reports. It was titled, Observations on Velkhari Military Ceremony and Tradition. Reading it now, she saw it was actually a detailed breakdown of Velkhari command structure, strategic doctrine, and military psychology. Hidden in plain sight, they were preparing for this, she said numbly. For 300 years they were preparing. No, matriarch. I think they were preparing to never need this. But they were ready in case they did. The human fleet established orbital superiority over Velkar's Prime within 8 hours of entering the system. Not because the Velkhari didn't fight back, but because human weapons, human tactics, and human intelligence gathering had created a perfect storm of military efficiency. Tai Young. I'll broadcast a message to the planet below. Matriarch Skrita and the remaining members of the Triumvirate will surrender themselves for trial on charges of genocide. You have 12 hours to comply? If you refuse, we will demonstrate what orbital bombardment actually looks like when the attackers aren't concerned about galactic opinion. Across the galaxy, species watched the events unfold with growing horror. The humans weren't fighting like the galactic community fought. They weren't seeking glory or honor. They weren't trying to prove superiority. They were simply brutally destroying everything in their path. Commander Gina returned to Soul's vengeance after her 8th sortie. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline and something darker. She had killed hundreds of Velkhari today. Her weapons had been precise and deadly. She felt nothing about it except a grim satisfaction. Dr. Hannah Cho, monitoring events from Earth, watched the casualty reports with tears streaming down her face. The Velkhari military was being systematically destroyed, but civilian deaths were remarkably low. The humans were being careful not to repeat what had been done to them. They're showing restraint, she said to Minho, who stood beside her. No, Minho corrected. They're showing mercy. There's a difference. Restraint is what we showed for 300 years. Mercy is what we're showing now, by not doing to them what they did to us. The 12-hour deadline approached. Matriarch Skrita stood in her command center, looking at the images of the human fleet above. She had ordered the deaths of 12 million humans, believing they wouldn't respond with force. She had been catastrophically wrong. Prepare my surrender, she said finally. And may the ancestors forgive what I've brought upon our people. When the Velkhari leadership was taken into custody, Yunji's team secured them personally. The matriarch looked at the young human soldiers with something like understanding now. You were always capable of this, Skrita said. Why did you wait so long? Yunji met her eyes coldly. Because we were trying to be better than this. You made being better impossible. The galaxy watched as humanity achieved in days what should have taken months. The Velkhari, who had been considered a major military power, were effectively neutralized. And the humans had done it with almost casual efficiency. The message was clear to every species watching. Humanity had been holding back for 3 centuries. With the Velkhari neutralized, the galaxy expected humanity to stop. They expected negotiations, peace terms, a return to diplomatic processes. Instead, General Soman Lee activated the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th fleets. The intelligence network that Ambassador Jiwon had built over 40 years proved to be devastatingly comprehensive. 4 species had provided logistical support to the Velkhari attack. They had offered their shipyards for Velkhari vessels to refuel. They had shared intelligence on human colony positions. They had turned off their sensor networks at crucial moments to hide the Velkari fleet. Movements. They had thought these contributions were small, unnoticeable. They were wrong. General Soman addressed her commanders via secure channels. The Drathan Confederation, the Kresh Hierarchy, the Yilmar Collective, and the Decian Republic all aided the Velkari assault. They believed their involvement would go undetected. We will show them the cost of that calculation. General, the Council is demanding we stand down, one commander reported. They're threatening sanctions. Let them threaten. Begin operations. 3 human fleets moved simultaneously, not toward the species' homeworlds, but toward their military infrastructure. Shipyards, training facilities, weapons production plants. Within 72 hours, 4 different species watched their military capabilities systematically dismantled. The humans didn't invade. They didn't occupy. They didn't engage in prolonged battles. They simply destroyed anything that could be used for war and then moved on. It was surgical and terrifying in its precision. Meanwhile, Junho Park arrived at the Galactic Council chamber. He was Ambassador G1's younger brother, 55 years old, and he had never wanted to be a diplomat. But his sister was recovering from a breakdown on Earth, and someone needed to represent humanity. The difference was that Junho wasn't there to ask for anything. The Matheran Arbiter's musical tones were sharp with anger. Your military actions are in violation of 17 different galactic treaties. The Council demands immediate withdrawal and reparations to the affected species. Junho listened politely until the Arbiter finished. Then he pulled up a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. This is footage from the Tai Yang 3 colony, 6 hours before it was destroyed. Children playing in a park. My niece is in this image, the girl with the blue jacket. She was 8 years old. The chamber fell silent. The footage played. Happy children, families, normal life. This is the same location for hours later. The screen showed fire, destruction, nothing alive. The silence in the chamber deepened. 12 million people, Junho said quietly. And when we asked for help, you debated procedures. When we asked for protection, you laughed. When we asked for justice, you told us to be patient. That does not justify. Junho's voice hardened. We're not seeking your permission. We're not asking for your approval. We're informing you of humanity's new position regarding the galactic community. He pulled up another display. A map showing human space with a clearly marked boundary zone extending well beyond Earth's previous territories. This is humanity's exclusion zone. No species may enter without explicit permission. Any vessel that crosses this boundary will be destroyed without warning. Any communication regarding this policy will be ignored. Humanity is withdrawing from the galactic community entirely. The chamber erupted in multiple languages. Some species protested. Others demanded negotiations. A few simply looked at the display with growing understanding. You can't do this, the Matheran protested. The galactic community requires cooperation. Trade routes depend on open space. Medical technology, cultural exchange. Scientific cooperation. Should have thought of that before you let millions of humans die, Junho interrupted. We offered you partnership for 300 years. You treated us as second-class members at best and targets at worst. We're done. Representative from the Sothri species. One of the few who had consistently abstained from voting against human interests spoke up. Their voice was translated as concerned. But what about species who wish to maintain relations with humanity? There were those of us who opposed the Velkari actions. Junho's expression softened slightly. You opposed them by abstaining, not by voting against them, not by offering aid. By doing nothing? I'm sure that felt very comfortable at the time. The truth of that statement hung in the air. The Sothri representative sat back down. Captain Minho Kong was leading the occupation force on Velkaris. Prime when the real bombshell dropped. His teams had been securing Velkari military archives, and they found something that changed everything. You need to see this, his intelligence officer said, her voice shaking. The documents were communications between the Valkyrie, triumvirate, and representatives from 8 council species. Not just the 4 who had aided the attack directly, but 8. The messages dated back 3 years. We believe a demonstration of force against human colonies would establish the natural hierarchy of galactic power. The humans have grown comfortable in their assumption that diplomatic processes will protect them. A swift, decisive strike would remind them of their proper place. The message was from a Matheran diplomat. Minho read through more documents, his face growing harder with each page. The attack on human colonies hadn't been a Valkyrie initiative. It had been encouraged by nearly half the council. They had wanted to test human resolve. They had wanted to see if humanity would accept permanent inferior status in the galactic community. 12 million deaths had been an experiment. Minho immediately sent the files to Earth. Within hours, Junho was broadcasting them on every galactic frequency. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. The Galactic Council, the institution that was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of atrocity, had actively encouraged it. The political fallout was immediate. Several species demanded the removal of their representatives who had been involved. Others tried to deny the evidence. The Matheran arbiter resigned, claiming the communications were unauthorized. Junho's response was broadcast. Across the galaxy, whether authorized or not, these messages prove what we've suspected for 300 years. The galactic community doesn't see humanity as equals. You see us as experiments, as test subjects, as resources to be exploited. You made that choice. We're making ours. General Soman received new orders from Earth. Every species whose representatives had been involved in encouraging the Valkyrie attack would now face consequences. Not military ones this time. Economic and technological. Humanity had been the galaxy's most generous species for 3 centuries. Human medical technology had extended lifespans for 6 different species. Human agricultural methods had ended famines on 12 worlds. Human fusion technology powered half the space stations in the galaxy. Human cultural works were studied by every species. All of that stopped. Simultaneously, medical technology licenses were revoked. Technical support ended. Educational exchanges canceled. Trade agreements nullified. Cultural works recalled. Humanity's 300 years of generosity ended in a single coordinated action. The economic impact was staggering. 3 species faced immediate energy crises when their fusion reactors, maintained by human engineers, began failing. 2 species lost access to medical treatments that had become standard care. The Galactic Council's space station had to evacuate half its sections when human-built life support systems shut down without human technicians to maintain them. They're hurting themselves. By doing this, one council member protested, human trade brings enormous profit. They don't care about profit, another replied. They care about survival. We taught them they can't trust us for that. Dr. Hannah Cho watched the isolation take effect from Earth. She had spent her entire career building bridges between species, and now she watched those bridges burn. Part of her believed this was wrong, that humanity was becoming the very thing they had fought against. But she had also seen the footage from Taeyong. 3. She had watched her colleagues die while the council debated procedures. She had heard the Matheran arbiter's musical tones explaining why humanity should wait patiently for help that would never come. Is this who we are now? She asked Juwan, who had finally returned to work despite her doctor's advice. The older woman looked tired but resolved. This is who we need to be to survive. I spent 40 years believing the galaxy could be better. I was wrong. Not because the galaxy can't be better, but because it chose not to be. Border construction began immediately. Massive defensive platforms appeared at every entry point to human space. They weren't traditional military installations. They were automated systems designed for one purpose: preventing anything non-human from entering without authorization. Admiral Taeyong oversaw the construction personally. These platforms will remain active for the foreseeable future. Maybe forever. We tried to be part of their community. That experiment is over. Young Officer Hyun-woo watched the platforms being deployed. What if some species genuinely want peace? What if there are aliens who would treat us fairly? Then they should have spoken up when it mattered, Tae-young replied. When 12 million humans were dying, when the council was debating procedures, when their representatives were encouraging genocide, they had their chance to prove they were different. The platforms went live simultaneously, creating an impenetrable barrier around human space. The message was simple. Humanity was done asking permission to exist safely. JUNHO gave one final address to the Galactic Council before closing Earth's embassy permanently. You wanted to know what humanity would do if pushed. Now you know. We don't conquer. We don't dominate. We withdraw. And we make sure you never get another chance to hurt us. He left the chamber without waiting for a response. Behind him, the council dissolved into chaos. Some species tried to maintain order. Others immediately began planning how to exploit the power vacuum humanity was leaving behind. A few simply realized they had made a terrible mistake. The galaxy had lost its most generous member. What they gained was a reminder that generosity, patience, and peace were choices humanity made. And when those choices weren't reciprocated, humanity had other options. 5 years after the war, Admiral Hin-woo Nam stood on the bridge of the border station designated Guardian 7. He was 35 now, promoted 3 times in 5 years because humanity needed people who understood both the old diplomacy and the new isolation. Through the viewport, he could see the edge of human space, marked by defensive platforms that hummed with enough power to reduce entire fleets to dust. Beyond that border, the galaxy was changing in ways nobody had predicted. 3 species had collapsed completely without human support. Not because humanity had attacked them, but because their entire economies had been built on human trade and technology. They had taken human generosity for granted, assuming it would continue forever. 2 species were thriving. Having seized abandoned human infrastructure in the Outer Rim and reverse-engineered what they could. They were growing powerful, filling the vacuum humanity left behind. 4 species were engaged in resource wars, fighting over territories that human diplomacy had kept peaceful through careful mediation. Without humanity's stabilizing influence, old conflicts reignited. The Galactic Council still existed, but it was barely functional. Half the species had stopped attending. Several had formed their own alliances, competing power blocks that viewed each other with suspicion. The universal translator networks humanity had maintained were degrading, making communication between species increasingly difficult, and through it all, the border stations watched, silent, vigilant, absolutely uncompromising. Hyun-woo's tactical officer reported another incident. Admiral, we have a crash vessel approaching the border. They're broadcasting distress signals. Hull breach. Life support failing. Requesting emergency shelter? It's happened at least once a week. Ships in trouble approaching the border, asking for help. Some genuinely in distress. Others testing to see if humanity's isolation was absolute. Send the standard response. Hyun-woo ordered. The automated message went out in Kresh language. You are approaching human territorial borders. Turn back immediately. This is your only warning, sir. They're saying they have civilians aboard. Children, they'll die if we don't help. Hyun-woo felt the weight of the decision. 5 years ago, humanity would have helped immediately. Sent rescue teams, provided medical care, asked nothing in return. That was how 12 million humans had died, trusting that others would show the same compassion. Maintain position. Send navigational data to the nearest non-human station. That's all we're authorized to provide. The Kresh ship turned away, limping toward a station that was 2 days' travel away. Hyun-woo didn't know if they made it. He couldn't let himself care. On Earth, Dr. Hannah Cho was fighting a different battle. She ran one of the few xenology departments still functioning, preserving alien languages, cultures, and histories. Most humans didn't care anymore. Entire generations were growing up believing the galaxy was irredeemably hostile. Why are we keeping these? A young student asked, looking at a collection of Velkari art pieces. They killed millions of us. Because forgetting what they were capable of creating makes it easier to forget why their destruction mattered, Anna explained. These pieces were made before the war. They represent what could have been if different choices had been made. The student didn't look convinced. He had been born after the war, raised on stories of betrayal and isolation. To him, aliens weren't potential friends or partners. They were threats kept at bay by the border. Hannah saw this attitude everywhere. Human entertainment had shifted away from optimistic space exploration stories to tales of isolated survival. Human children grew up learning combat skills as standard education. Human politics focused almost entirely on defense and self-sufficiency. "We're losing something," she told Minho during one of their regular discussions. He was semi-retired now, working as a security consultant, but they had remained friends. "Or we're learning from our mistakes," Minho countered. 300 years of optimism got 12 million people killed. Maybe pessimism will keep the rest of us alive. There has to be a middle ground. There was. We tried it. They used it to target our colonies. The argument was old and unresolvable. Hannah went back to her work, cataloging and preserving information about species that humanity would likely never interact with again. Jiwon Park was dying. She was 93 years old, her body failing despite the best medical care Earth could provide. She had spent the last 5 years on a single project she called The Record. It was a comprehensive database of everything that had led to the war. Every diplomatic meeting, every insult ignored, every act of generosity that went unreciprocated, every warning sign that was dismissed, and critically, every mistake humanity had made in the process. "It's not propaganda," she explained to the historians who would maintain the archive after her death. "It's truth. Future generations need to know all of it. Why we tried peace. Why it failed. What we did in response? They need to understand the full picture to make better choices." "What choices, Ambassador?" "We're isolated. There's nowhere left to go but deeper into our own space." "For now," Guan said. "But humans live long lives, and we have very long memories. Someday, someone will want to try again. They need to know why it went wrong before. They need the truth, not myths." The record was completed 3 days before Jiwon died. Her last entry was personal, not diplomatic. "I believed in the possibility of peace so strongly that I couldn't see when it had already failed. I kept trying to build bridges while others were burning them. I don't know if peace was ever truly possible, or if I was naive to think it was. What I do know is that 12 million people died while I filed reports and made speeches. That's on me. That's on all of us who believe process mattered more than results. To whoever reads this in the future, don't make my mistakes. But please, try to find a better way than isolation. Because this isn't winning. It's just not losing." The transmission arrived at Guardian 7 without warning. It came through the old diplomatic channels that hadn't been used in 5 years. The sender was identified as Velkari. But the encryption was different, newer, not military. Hyun was deleted it automatically. But something made him open it instead. The message was from a young Velkari named Krishan. She had been born after the war, after the Triumvirate's surrender. Her message was simple but stunning. "I am a student of what my people call the Great Shame. I have studied the war, the colony attacks, everything that led to our isolation from humanity. I have read the translated testimony of survivors. I have seen the evidence of what the Triumvirate ordered. I am requesting permission to enter human space. Not as a diplomat, not as a representative. As someone who needs to understand what my species destroyed, I need to hear the stories from those who lived through it. I need to carry that knowledge back to my people, so we never forget the cost of our actions." The request sat in Hyunwoo's queue for 3 days while he consulted with Earth Command. The debate was intense. Some argued any Velkari should be shot on sight for even approaching the border. Others saw it as a potential intelligence opportunity. A few suggested it might be a genuine attempt at understanding. The decision went up to the highest levels of human government. Unexpectedly, it came back approved. With conditions, Krishan was allowed to enter human space under constant military escort. She was taken to the memorial sites built on the locations of the destroyed colonies. She was allowed to meet with survivors who volunteered to speak with her. Every moment was recorded. The young Valkyrie's reactions were documented carefully. She broke down crying at the Taiyang 3 memorial, seeing the names of 12,000 children who had died there. She listened to survivor testimony for hours, never interrupting, never defending. When she finally spoke, her words were translated carefully. "I cannot apologize enough. No words I have can match what was taken. But I need to understand, and I need to take that understanding back to my people. We're teaching the next generation about the war. Some want to forget it. Others want revenge for our defeat. I want them to understand what we actually did." She met with Dr. Hannah Cho, who showed her the preserved Valkyrie art pieces. "Your species created beauty once. Before the war, these pieces prove it." Chrysian studied the art with something like grief. "We still create, but it's different now, darker. We're a species living with shame. Some of us want to pretend it didn't happen. Others embrace it, say we were right to be aggressive. I think both are wrong. We need to remember, but remember truthfully." The visit lasted 2 weeks. When Chrysian prepared to leave, she was given something unexpected, a copy of the record. Jiwan's comprehensive database of events leading to the war from the human perspective. "Share this with whoever will listen," Hannah said. "Not as propaganda. As history. Your people's version and ours. Maybe someday someone can make sense of both." After Chrysian left, the debate on Earth intensified. Was this the beginning of possible reconciliation? Or just another way for aliens to gather intelligence on humanity's defenses? Hyunwoo stood at the border, watching the Valkyrie ship cross back into galactic space. He didn't know what would come of this. He didn't know if peace was possible, or if humanity would remain isolated forever. What he did know was that the border platforms would remain active. The fleets would remain ready. The defensive protocols would stay in place, because hope was dangerous, and humanity had learned that lesson at a terrible cost. But maybe, just maybe, understanding was different than hope. Understanding didn't require trust. It just required truth. Somewhere in human space, a child asked her mother about the stars beyond the border. The mother hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "There are other species out there. Long ago, we tried to be friends with them. It didn't work out. Now, we live separately. It's safer this way. Will we ever try again?" The mother looked at the border stations visible in the night sky. "I don't know. Maybe your children will, or their children. But if we do, it will be on our terms. We'll never again put our survival in someone else's hands." The child accepted this answer and went back to her studies. She was learning engineering, designing better defensive systems, preparing for a future where humanity might need to protect itself again. It was what all human children learned now. Across the galaxy, similar conversations happened in different languages. Alien children asked about the missing species who had built so much and then withdrawn. Some adults told stories of human weakness, justifying what had happened. Others told stories of human danger, warning their children never to provoke them. A very few told the truth, that humans had wanted peace, that the galaxy had rejected it, and that both sides now lived with the consequences of that rejection. The border remained. The platforms hummed with power. The fleets stood ready. And behind it all, humanity continued building, growing, and remembering. They had tried peace. The galaxy had shown them why that was dangerous. Now humanity would show the galaxy what isolation looked like when it's maintained by a species that had learned from its mistakes. The age of human diplomacy was over. What came next was uncertain, but it would be on humanity's terms, at humanity's pace. With humanity's safety as the only consideration that mattered, the galaxy had taught humanity a harsh lesson about trust. Humanity had taught the galaxy an even harsher lesson about consequences. Whether either species would learn from those lessons remained to be seen.